you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Premier, for that wonderful introduction. There's at least one man in the audience who remembered that speech over 22 years ago. I had counted him in my rounds in the city yesterday, and he said a familiar hello, and I said, "Oh, did you hear my last speech to the Ontario Liberal Party?" He said, "I hope so." But then, fortunately, his wife said, "Well, Mr. Sorensen, I was there. I thought that speech of yours, I thought it was just superfluous." I assumed she was joking, so I said, "Thank you, madam. I was thinking of having it published posthumously." She said, "I can hardly wait." In any event, you said it was at a policy conference, but I was told at the time, believe it or not, Heather Reisman of the bookstore in Toronto was the organizer of that event, and I was told it was a retreat, a word I never otherwise connected with the Ontario Liberal Party. But having come from working, as you mentioned, years in an office where the Irish Catholic culture was as prevalent as it was in your father's home, the first joke I heard there was about the man who came to confession and told the priest that he had been accused unjustly, he said, of robbing a lumber store. And the priest said, "Mike, have you ever made a retreat?" He said, "No, Father, but if you've got the plans, I've got the lumber." My father also was an idealist. The year I was born, 81 years ago, he was elected Reform Attorney General of Nebraska and told me much later that one Sunday morning he had been invited to speak at the Sunday morning chapel service at the state penitentiary. He stood up there, not certain how to begin, a little bit like I am right now. And he couldn't start with his usual, "My friends." He didn't want to acknowledge knowing any of them. He thought saying, opening "ladies and gentlemen" would be stretching it a bit. He couldn't even say the usual, "my fellow citizens," having taken citizenship rights away from some of them. So finally he just said, as I do now, "I'm glad to see so many of you here." You'd be surprised how many American audiences don't get that joke. But I am very happy to see so many of you here. After all, there are many former White House folks whom you could have invited. You could have invited Bill Clinton and George W. Bush for $150,000 each, or Colin Powell for $100,000. But the Liberal Party of Ontario believes in free speech. And today you're getting one. The Premier asked me to speak again on the theme of leadership, which was the theme of my speech in January. It'll be 23 years. I promised not to give the same speech because it was way too long, but I may touch on some of the same themes. What must be the qualities of a good leader? The first is the very quality that the Premier, who reflects that quality, mentioned, and that's the quality of integrity. A good leader must have a conscience, and that conscience must be represented in all that he says and does. He must have compassion for those who are at the bottom of the economic ladder. He must have concern for those in this and other provinces and other countries who have been denied equal opportunity. He must have conviction that this can be a better province, Canada can be a better country, and ours can be a better world. Idealism, as exhibited by your Premier, as exhibited by John F. Kennedy, for whom I worked, idealism must be the first quality of a successful leader. The second is he must have courage. I'm not talking about physical courage, though I'm sure the Premier and all of you who have engaged in a long campaign know that it can be a test of physical strength like no other test. Although candidates are lucky, they get to go to sleep at night and prepare for the next day. The speechwriter has to stay up all night and work for the next day. But courage that I'm talking about is political courage. There is a column in this morning's New York Times by a Republican columnist saying that the test for Obama in Afghanistan, which is of concern to Canadians as well, is whether he is going to show determination, stick to it, to stay and stay and stay in Afghanistan. Sometimes that stubbornness is not courage. Sometimes it takes more courage to recognize that you have made a mistake, or to recognize that the politically popular position is not the right position. And that's what the book mentioned by the Premier was all about. Profiles in courage. Members of the United States Senate over its history who stood up against powerful interests, pressure groups, political classic positions, doing so at the cost, potential cost of their elected posts. Political courage can be the toughest kind of courage, and not many have it in modern times. But that kind of courage, a willingness to spend popularity after you've earned it, that is the mark of a truly great leader.